If you think back to those dinners again, or you think back to the family relationship in which you were brought up, how was conflict addressed? Was it chaos?
My father basically said, you're not going to sit around and just going to physical therapy all summer. You're going to actually, make productive use of your time. So he enrolled me into real estate school so I could get my real estate license. You had to wait until you were 18. It ended up being probably one of the best things that had actually ended up happening to me too.
Kendall Schoenrock, thank you for joining us on the Hidden Foundation podcast, a podcast built around the ideas that grit and resiliency and strength are not accidental traits, but they're shaped early in one's life. Today, we're joined by Andrea Edry in Center City, Philadelphia, a entrepreneur and real estate pro. Tell me about your journey. How did you end up in real estate?
So I was born into a family of what I would call real estate professionals, never having any intention to one day also, join the pack. But both of my parents were in real estate. My dad was more on the development, land acquisition side, and my mom's family had independent brokerages. She was a salesperson and a builder as well. So I was kind of I was surrounded by it, whether I liked it or not back then.
Were there times that you didn't like it when you were young?
I think the scheduling when there's an old joke. If you're in real estate, it's like being a doctor. You're on call 24/7. And that's
Sure.
very much the case because at the end of the day, you're in a client driven, client service driven business. So, you do have to, be available when the phone rings or when you get an email or you get pinged. Um, so it's also kind of for me, I end up liking that just because I'm slightly addicted to work. But no, it can get a little annoying when people are texting you at all hours of the night expecting you to get back to them, and they do. Some people do not like to wait, as we know.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's a very rewarding profession.
My parents were also in real estate, so I understand exactly what you're talking about there. Can you maybe drill down and double click on that for a second? So, do you think that some of the drivers of your current success was emulating aspects of how your parents approached their real estate careers?
For sure. My mom was very good in doing laying houses out and the building aspect with floor plans and kind of working with trying to make homes, synergistically it makes sense for the families. And my dad was really kind of a deal junkie at the end of the day with taking a piece of land and really trying to lay it out where something that was people couldn't see it having any value and like really creating a lot of value. And so I'd like to think that I what I do is a little bit of the best of both of those worlds because we do a lot with development, working with builders, and then we do a lot of just regular deals. So I definitely learned from both of them. They have very different styles, in a good way. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So, I think I read that you got your real estate license at 18. Is that correct?
I did, yes.
Did they
I didn't have a
push you?
choice.
Did
Yeah,
they push you to get your license?
I I came home from college my first summer between my freshman going into my sophomore year, and I had torn my ACL playing college basketball. So when I came home to do the surgery and do the rehab, my father basically said, you're not gonna sit around and just going to physical therapy all summer. You're gonna actually, make productive use of your time. So he enrolled me into real estate school so I could get my real estate license. You had to wait until you were 18 by law. So as soon as I was pretty much old enough to get my license, I got it. So that was the my how my summer was spent, which really wasn't what I had envisioned for my summer, but it ended up being a very, very good use of my time.
So, you were playing basketball, you turn ACL. Your dad says you're not going to sit around, you're going to go to work. Did you close deals as an 18-year-old that had your license?
I was able to help them, so it was also a catalyst for them being able to pay me legitimately. Um,
Yeah.
going out on appointments with my mom. She had a lot of open houses, and when she was working on new developments, she had one day off a week. So in the summer, I was sitting with her on the weekends and being able to kind of assist some of the clients that were coming in, looking at the new houses. So I ended up, it was a little bit of a side hustle. Probably didn't get paid as much as I would have liked, but you know, when you're 18 and your parents are paying for everything, you're at their mercy.
What led you to play college basketball?
I got into sports at a young age, fifth grade, and I happened to be pretty good at sports. It kept me out of trouble, and I had a gift for a few different sports. So I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship for college, um, and that really kind of took me out of my suburban Detroit environment into New York City, which was a really great experience. Real estate's very different in New York City, as you could imagine, in most suburban areas of the country. So I kind of got a quick little taste of just how different that whole side of real estate was, being surrounded by some of the most magnificent buildings in the world, architecturally and just from design perspective.
One of the things that I'm interested in is whether or not your parents used jobs and money making opportunities as a way to build your work ethic, or if they leaned into sports as a chalice for those for that grit. What do you think? Was it a deliberate decision on their side, or was it something that you just took a passion for and explored that way?
Yeah, I mean, they were extremely supportive of my sports, but at the end of the day, like I still had to, be a student athlete. It wasn't just about being a great athlete, it was about being a great student athlete. So, I had to have certain grades, just stay focused. If I started something and I didn't like it, I had to finish it regardless of, how much I would have rather have been doing other things. That
Right.
really didn't happen as much with sports. It happened more when my mother tried to enroll me into dance classes, which I was not having. But, sports at an early age just kind of became a very good outlet for me from other things going on at home and just other distractions that, you can easily fall into when you're young. And I was always growing up around, I had an older brother, older male cousins. So um I was very competitive, and I wanted to be a participant. I didn't want to be a spectator.
It sounds like one of the behaviors that was driven into, if you're going to sign up for something, you're not going to quit. How do you think that feeds into your current business and your journey in real estate?
It's extremely connected, especially when we sign up for in our area of what I'd like to say expertise, our specialties. We end up taking some really unique and specialty properties that are a bit of, in some cases they're outliers in the local marketplace. Um, they're not always the easiest
Yeah.
sales, one either because of size or because of price. So you kind of have to like stick it through. You have to kind of keep getting creative and trying to find different ways to sell the property, to take it all the way to closing, even in certain environments that aren't so easy. But I think when you I like to tell the agents, if you don't over promise and under deliver, right? And you have to really believe in what you're doing, believe in what you're saying. um and if you're signing up for something to work with someone, whether it's a buyer or a seller, you're committing to that person. It's a relationship. So you're making a commitment to that buyer, that seller, that developer, to really kind of deliver. And I think that's key in everything in life. Even, in certain environments that aren't so easy. But I think when you I like to tell the agents, if you don't over promise and under deliver, right? And you have to really believe in what you're doing, believe in what you're saying. Um, and if you're signing up for something to work with someone, whether it's a buyer or a seller, you're committing to that person. It's a relationship. So you're making a commitment to that buyer, that seller, that developer, to really kind of deliver. And I think that's key in everything in life.
You're one of the best performing agents in the nation. What makes you special? If you're listing a large house out on the main line, why should someone select you?
Well, I think it's not just about me, but it's about the team that I'm able to put together. You can LeBron can be the best player on the planet, but unless he has a team around him that is equally talented and, has different strengths, maybe where some of his weaknesses are.
Yeah.
We work a lot differently, so it's not really just about me and what I do and what I bring to the table. I have to be able to execute a lot of different things with some of these sales, and I know enough to know that you can't be all things to all people, so you have to put people around you that, you really trust and believe in, that can step in if you're not able to be there. So that's something that we really focus on, and for all these properties, there's, like, a different team in place depending on if it's in the city, if it's on the main line, if it's,
Yeah.
in Bucks County, we work together. So again, it's just not all about me. I have to leverage like my strengths with the people that I think are equally as talented around me.
So are you actively is it a deliberate decision on your part on how you cultivate the team and set the culture? How do you go about that?
Absolutely. So, when you're dealing with different projects, you have to have a really strong marketing team in place. And we handle all that in house. You have to have a really strong social media team in place. We have that both in house and the corporate up in New York, which we really lean heavily on for certain things as well. And then you have to have agents that are also helping you in supporting roles. So they have, they may have different spheres of influence. So if you're able to have a co-listing agent, which I usually have a co-listing agent on all of my properties. They have a different Rolodex than I do, right? They're in front of a different audience. They may live in a different neighborhood. They may have kids in different schools. So it's kind of trying to cast as wide of a net as you can in order to make sure that that property is really being exposed. It's being seen. If you're working with a buyer, then, you've got a lot of different fires, coals in the fire just for exposure. Right now, the market's so competitive, and there's so many deals that are being done before properties are listed, and you have to kind of go out and source some of these specialty homes or these deals before they hit the open market. Um, so it's like anything, you really need a good supporting team around you.
What's the secret sauce that really allows you to grab a high-end property and broadcast it and find the needle in the haystack of a buyer who's interested in that specific property?
We just went through it very, very recently where we had this real trophy property for a trophy seller. Um, and the property was a bit of a unicorn just in terms of price and design and location. And each property, that we'd like to think has its own story, right? It's its own brand. It's just not a one size fits all when it comes to marketing with some of these homes, because they're, at the end of the day, who the seller is isn't always the same profile as who that next end user is going to be. So you have to really be able to tell a story about the property, whether it's the lifestyle, whether it's the privacy, the amenities. So and you have to kind of approach them from a couple different angles, because you know, you might have a professional athletes selling the property, and then the people that end up buying it are empty nesters with grandchildren. So they're two totally different profiles. So the messaging can't always be the same. Um, so we like to get creative. If one thing isn't working, you have to be able to pivot and figure out, what's another message, what's another approach we can do. Is it traditional marketing? Social media is great, but you also have to be able to incorporate some other aspects, because,
Yeah.
what we find is not all of our sellers are actively on social media. So you have to still be able to reach them. These particular buyers, they weren't even in the market. So we kind of went back to a little bit of more old school marketing and did direct mailing. And they were captivated enough by what we had put out in the mail to come and see this property in Society Hill, and they bought it. So, you know,
Yeah.
they're very, very different profile from the seller.
Did your parents use a lot of the same techniques in your leveraging that base, or are these new unique ideas that you're taking and coming up with and standing on top of the shoulders of giants?
Well, I think you have to be able. to do a little bit of both. So, when my parents were when I was growing up and they were, between the 80s and 90s, there was no social media. You kind of had to just really rely on relationships and in doing more of like the door knocking. Um, you're waiting for people to walk into the door and being able to connect with them at that point. So, that it at the end of the day, it's still very much a relationship driven business.
Yeah.
We become pretty much involved with both buyers and sellers. But what we find is like sometimes people, again, they don't know that they're looking for a property at a certain price point. They don't need anything. Like they don't need to move. They don't necessarily need to buy, and they don't always need to sell. So it's finding that angle with like what's the catalyst for them really selling and moving on, or what's the catalyst for them really leaving their current home and buying something else. So some psychology also comes into that. So coupled with creative marketing and really trying to get into the heads of the buyers and sellers and finding out the angle that is going to be the catalyst to making them ultimately making a decision. Um, so it's fun. It's a little bit draining at times, but keeps everything interesting.
Is that the hunt that drives you? Is that where you
Yeah.
get the and derive the most joy out of what you're working on?
I like the fact that most of our people they're very unique. You don't necessarily always work with two of the same types of people. You do have certain profiles, the type A, the CEO, but at the end they're all, they kind of have their own type to some degree. So you can't always have it's not a one size fits all. And in our industry, it's not. You can't always have the same type of conversation with people. You take bits and pieces of it, but you really it's not like there's a script and this is what you say to this person. Um, a lot of the people that we work with ends up being, in multiple spectrums. So, for
Mm.
me, it keeps it interesting. I feel like I'm learning every day, learning from, you know, who we're dealing with on either side of the transaction. Um, it becomes fun. It's very challenging.
You obviously studied under your parents and their real estate careers, and they cultivated you and showed you how they approach problem solving. And now with your team, I assume that you're cultivating them to your beliefs and your culture. How do you go about that? Are there parallels in the way that your parents cultivated you?
Well, we have a really big hammer in the office, and when they don't do something that I like, I just hit them over the head. That usually gets the answer. No, but um, you know, our marketing team, they're young, right? They look at the world differently. Our head of creative, she started off as an intern for me. Um, she's a family friend, and started off as an intern. She was doing great. Everybody loved her. We kept her on her senior year in college, and then when she was graduating, we made her a job offer, and she's been with us over 3 years now. So it's been great kind of, bringing somebody from when they were 20 and then staying with them until now she's 25. Um, and having like just looking at what we do through a different lens because she doesn't have a real estate license. Um, but she sees things differently. Her life experiences have been different. She's, kind of looking at things very, very differently than what some of the I'd like to consider myself an older agent now, a veteran. Um, and I think you need that. You really need that. The creativity can come in so many different ways, right? There's not a playbook for it. So
Yeah.
we do butt heads. Sometimes she tells me things that I don't want to hear and vice versa. But we really try and work collaboratively, whether we're putting together a marketing campaign or, a brochure or just listed mailer, just really trying to kind of like, I want to see what our marketing team, what they think, like what do they see when they're receiving or reading, our literature, and then flip the lens on what I see. And usually it's two very different things, right? And so you kind of have to be able to bridge that gap because again, you never know who that end user is going to be.
Yeah.
So
And
if you're looking at it from a Gen X versus a Gen Z. It's going to be two very different things. So
It reminds me, I was out, I was talking to a business owner, restaurant owner out in Colorado. He has a number of restaurants along a ski resort. And I was asking, how he sets his culture. And he said one of the things they do is if any of their line cooks want to go back to school, he'll send them to culinary school. And a person I was standing next to when we had this discussion said, "Yeah, but what if you send them to culinary school and they leave?" And he said, "What if I don't send them to school and they stay?" And so I really like the concept of taking as much raw talent and encouraging them to grow and prosper. It sounds like you're doing a really good job with your team and finding diamonds in the rough and bringing them forward and getting the most out of them. So thank you for that. Let's go back and I want to explore a little bit more about the early dynamics of
Wait, Marcus,
where you were raised. Um, Describe for me, for example, what dinner time was like with your family.
the first probably 6 years of my life were spent in northern Michigan in a very small town called Mackinac, where my dad's family was from. And then as I got into elementary school, we moved down just outside Detroit, where my mom's family was from. So it was really, the, my grandparents were very influential in raising me. My grandmother, my mom's mom, I would say, was probably, um, I was the closest with her because she really was, um, she raised most of her grandchildren. My mom was a working mom, so she wasn't, didn't have as much time with pickup and school activities. So I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they were very big on family time, ate at the same time every day. Um, there was always a lot of activity with my grandfather's family. He was one of 10. So there was always somebody kind of coming over. We had a very large family, so that part was great. I had a lot of cousins, and I was close with my mom's all of her siblings as well. So it was kind of like we had a very big extended family, which
Were your grandparents also entrepreneurial,
they
or
were, yeah, both sides. My mom's father had never made it past the 8th grade, but he owned multiple businesses, factories, were connected to the automotive industry. Her mom worked. She was not a stay-at-home mom. So my grandmother was a worker. She really was pretty much the catalyst behind my grandparents going into different businesses, whether it was, they had a stamping plant, and then they found opportunities with building hotels. So they kind of, wherever they saw an opportunity, they were risk takers, which was great. And very, very hardworking. So and they were very, very big on family. And my dad's side as well. So my dad's family, they had a bunch of small businesses in northern Michigan, and my dad's mother ended up becoming a widow with 8 children at a young age, and she went from pretty much being, more of a stay-at-home mom to becoming um, a businesswoman in her 50s. So once my grandfather died, and she worked until she was in her 80s. So for 30 years, she was running, her businesses and just trying to take over and keep things afloat. The whole concept of not having a job or being a homemaker, that was very foreign to me. So, um, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just something that I really didn't have any. All the women in my life really worked, and they worked um, at first because they had to, and then they continued to work because they wanted to.
yeah? Was money discussed at those dinners? Was money used as a tool, or was it covered up and hidden?
No, I mean, I think it was my mom's family for sure. They were very driven by making sure that that was a catalyst for growth, right? Like you can pretty much have whatever you want as long as you work hard. If you want nice things, you're going to have to work for them. Um, they were very open about it, maybe too much to some degree, but
Mhm.
they definitely did not hide the fact that, it was an important thing in life. I think it's also because neither one of them grew up with it. So, um, they wanted better things. They wanted better things for their family. and they weren't afraid to work for it. So we had open discussions about money, about how much things cost, how much, there was, how much maybe there wasn't.
How did that impact how you've raised you have one son, or tell me about your kids?
I have a 4-year-old son who,
4-year-old son.
yes, and
Yeah.
I'm very open about telling him how much money he costs and why I do what I do when he doesn't like what I'm working because he's very expensive. So it's important, I'm not working necessarily to set him up for life. I'm working to set him up for a life that he can function and maintain on his own versus me setting him up so that he's, supported and taken care of.
Yeah. So you're also approaching this for money as a tool, at least being transparent and open in those fundamental discussions with your family. Do you think that will continue moving forward? That you're going to be as transparent as possible with finances?
For sure. And I think there is always a reward, you set him up if he does good things, he gets, he has 3 piggy banks and he hasn't tapped into either of or any of the 3 just yet, but I know, he wants to. So for certain things, and it's important. I want him to be able to know that if he's working hard, if he's doing good, if he's doing his chores, if he's doing nice things for people, there can be a monetary reward for that, and that monetary value that you can put on it can be a catalyst for saving and having things that you want. I always tell him there's no free rides, so nothing's
Yeah.
free, even the
Right.
water. So he's now questioning everything. Water's not free. What about the air? What about
Yeah.
the lights? My nightlight, is that free? So um,
Sure.
can't take anything for granted.
You were brought up. How was conflict addressed, or was there good? Was it chaos, or talk to me about how conflict was resolved?
Well, depending on which parent. So my mom was a little bit more, probably a little bit more vocal and emotional. Um, she's more of a screamer. So, which we can joke about now, but, um, they were we didn't really have a lot of secrets, I think, growing up. So,
Mhm.
I was in a house with my parents and then also with my grandparents where you kinda knew everything that was going on, whether it was, we didn't have there was no secrecy. Um, so when there's no secrecy, I think, yes, there are conflicts and there are always arguments and there's always, a difference of opinions and people are always gonna unfortunately make decisions that you don't always agree with. Um, I would say my parents did their best. I think if they could go back and, maybe be a little bit more secretive with what was going on, they probably would have. But in the end, I think for me it was good seeing as much as I did, even at a young age. With what led up to their divorce and then kind of being able to kind of make sure that I don't make those same mistakes or I handle my conflict or whatever's going on in my personal life a little bit differently.
Did that manifest in you in anxiety, or
Um,
anxiousness with loud volume or screaming?
I definitely think I became a little bit more sensitive to it, but I was very much aware. Um, So, I'm very cognizant of like not repeating those same behavior patterns in front of my son or just being able to control it better. So
Yeah.
I think it really, I learned from it was kind of like, okay, this probably was an ideal environment growing up. And I don't want to recreate that. So
One of the things I know as a father myself, that there are always times that you lose your patience and you get triggered. And one of the things that I did um, was I set up an email address for my daughters. And if there was ever a moment where I was short or made a mistake, I would, even before they could read, I would write them an email and just archive it. And so it allowed me to express, I made a mistake. This is what happened. Here's what I'm going to try to do better. and I apologize. And so,
That's great.
also, I use it to like share photos and events and summaries of stuff that we've done together. And so, just recently, here in the last year or so, I've turned over both of those email addresses to my kids. I'm not sure that they've gone back and read everything since they were younger, and I'm not sure if that bothers me too much, but I know that it was very, very rewarding for me to set up those email addresses and document the good times and the bad, right?
Oh, for
Because every
sure.
parent's going to lose it. So
Yeah, no,
I
I mean,
appreciate that.
I'm very grateful. I think, my childhood had a lot of wonderful experiences, but there was also a lot of chaos and some, dysfunction for sure. Um, but I'm grateful for it because I think like that just has allowed me to become a better person in my adult life, in the life that I can control and in my parenting and in, my relationship with my husband. So,
Yeah,
some you kind of learn what you can either learn what to do or what not to do. So
right. Do you think that there's a resolving aspect of that where you saw the conflict and now you're attempting to resolve it in the way you structure your home currently?
for sure. Yeah. For sure. I think because we had no secrecy, I was privy to way too many things at a very young age, which also helped me to grow up and to be probably more mature. Um, but I think, the flip side of that is that there were certain things that I didn't have as a childhood that I probably as a child didn't need to be as aware about or be as concerned about. So um, I think the kids today they're just so inundated with so much different messaging and they're all so smart because they're just exposed to so much. So trying to do a better job of keeping my son a little bit more in a bubble for as long as I can because I know it won't last forever.
Right, right. So identifying that going through that process, although it wasn't necessarily enjoyable for you, was one of the key drivers that built your grit or your resiliency. Um, are you attempting to shelter your son from that pain and trouble, or are you open to introducing him and letting him stumble? Or t- double click on that, please.
Um, well, he's a different kid than what I was in a lot of ways. So I think, there's things that he's very, very much aware of, but certainly not lying to him. But the way that my parents handled their conflict and in relationship in front of us probably wasn't the healthiest for me and my siblings. Because I think like there are certain things that are, should have remained between the two of them and not necessarily a whole family, issue. My brother and I didn't necessarily need to be um, as worried about or just as aware of, because it also kind of it sets you up for having to pick a side between your parents, like,
Mhm.
and that's something that I certainly don't want to do with Miles. However, you can only protect them from so much. So, he's if I'm upset or there's something going on, these kids, they're so smart. They sense it. But the key is just, maybe not lying to them, but being able to determine how much is too much, how much is really like important for them to be aware of or have to worry about.
How old were you when you started playing basketball?
Um, Fifth grade, which is late now because all these kids start
Yeah.
playing out of the womb.
Right. And did you know that did you have a goal? Was it a decision that you made that you wanted to play college ball?
Um, I think it was something that it was a goal of mine. Um, I wasn't quite sure which sport I was going to play, whether it was going to be basketball, volleyball, or softball. But I enjoyed basketball just because when I was growing up, I was playing a lot with the boys on the basketball court, and it was a little bit more of a team sport that um, was a lot easier to play. I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where we had tennis courts everywhere, so basketball kind of became like, it was a sport where you could play by yourself or you could, play with a group of friends. I think probably my freshman year in high school, I started on 3 varsity teams, and it was kind of like, all right, well, you have to kind of pick and choose like what if you're going to make one your craft, what is it going to be? And I doubled down on basketball at that time. That's kind of when I think I really started thinking about it, like taking it. I can use one of my sports as a means to getting um, an education of going to college. Which one is it going to be? What do I have the best chance, and which one am I going to enjoy playing the most?
Did you select your college because of basketball?
Became a combination of basketball and education. Uh, Initially, I thought I was probably going to go to the school in California. We visited everywhere: USC, UCLA, Pepperdine. We did the schools in the Midwest. We went East Coast, Brown, Boston College. My mom says there probably wasn't a school that we didn't visit. Um,
Mm.
and we had gone through visiting probably 40 colleges, and I was just as confused as when I started. And I had always thought I was going to go Division 1. So those were really the only schools that we were looking at. And then I ended up getting a letter in the mail from New York University, and they were willing to pay for a free trip to come out to New York. And I'd never been to Manhattan before. So it's like, well, they have a free trip. They're going to pay for me and my mom and my dad. It's, great weekend vacation. Let's go check it out. And I ended up falling in love with it. And the the city, I didn't ever see myself as that big of a city person, but there is something so captivating about being, in Manhattan at 17 and in the village. And, it's like the bright lights, and the education was amazing. So I had a lot of friends that had played in big programs. And once you get injured, you kind of lose your scholarship. And I knew if I went somewhere where it was deemed more of an academic scholarship versus an athletic, even if I got injured, I wouldn't lose my money. Um, and then it turned out my freshman year, our Final Four game, I tore my ACL. But even though I couldn't play for most of the following season, I still kept my all of my aid. So it ended up being, I have no regrets. It was the best school for me at the time.
Was there fear or uncertainty with the decision to go? Because at that point you were in Michigan, correct?
Yeah.
So you're going from Michigan to New York City. Was that decision wrapped in fear or anxiety? Could you hang in the city?
Um, yeah, I mean, I was excited by it. It was just this new adventure that I really hadn't really given much thought to prior to visiting the school in December of my senior year. I think it was very different than where I initially saw myself. And I think that's kind of what this excitement was about. It was like going on this, European adventure. Um, and my parents both basically bribed me to stay and go to Michigan or Michigan State or stay somewhere in state. And there was a calling. Like I just knew like that school was the only place that I had truly connected with. And I knew that's where I needed to be. Um, it was a little scary, but I think it was also exhilarating too. It's just like, you know, every day was a new adventure. Being there at that age, and in the heart of the city, and just surrounded by so many fascinating things. New York's just like one of those places where you could be grabbing a cup of coffee and meet a Nobel laureate, or be standing next to Julia Roberts. And it was really, you kind of you realize if you can really function and navigate through that type of environment, like you can pretty much get through anything in life.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I spent a little bit of time in New York and thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, when you went through, or let's talk about college basketball again. So the journey through the injury, that first season, all the practices, all the games, you make it to the Final Four. What happened?
Um, yeah, it was a home game. So um, we had a home game, and it was, um, at that point, the biggest game of my life. We're playing a very, very, very good team, and with it was the last minute of the game, and I think I can't remember exactly what the score was, but we were either tied or down by 2, and I stole the ball and was going for a fast break, and instead of just doing the fast break, I tried to do a little fancy move, um, and blew out my knee in front of everybody. Um, so everyone thought I'd twisted my ankle or something, and but it was kind of this point where, like, I knew something was wrong, and I was thinking, like, all right, what am I gonna do? Right? Like, I can't believe I just did this. Like, the most important moment of my life, I just completely, wiped out and hobbled off the court. We won. So that was the main thing. But then the following game was the national championship, which was also at home. And I kind of had to watch from the sidelines on crutches. We also won, so that was great. That was wonderful to be a part of that. Um, but when that happened, I started thinking about my life not as just a student athlete anymore. I started thinking about my life as a student. So I wasn't sure how it was going to go or what that recovery was going to look like, if I was going to ever come back and play, and what that next journey for me was going to be.
Did you know in the moment that it was a torn ACL, or did you have an idea that it was a serious knee injury?
I knew it was serious. I didn't know it was my ACL at the time because I had been playing on a partially torn ACL um, for most of the season. So I knew there was something wrong. I just wasn't quite sure that it was going to be an 8-month recovery process.
Yeah, a lot of physical therapy.
Yeah,
A lot
but
of physical
ended up
therapy.
being probably one of the best things that had actually ended up happening to me too.
Tell me why. Explore that for me. So turning something that is potentially catastrophic in the moment to something that is the best thing that could have happened to you at that time. What does that mean?
Well, the following season, I sat out because I wasn't cleared to play. So I had gone home to Detroit to have my surgery, um, and to do the physical therapy and get my real estate license. And when I came back, since I wasn't traveling with the team, where we were gone from Thursday through Sunday of almost every week, and I still went to practices, but I didn't have to travel with the team. Um, I kind of ended up meeting a lot of different people and getting involved in different activities on campus, with the steam paper and governmental affairs. Um, I just kind of met a whole other. I mean, I met people that weren't even a part of, that weren't even students, because I had a little more free time. So I was able to go out and really explore the city and not just be stuck going to class and bouncing between class and the sports facility. And I just started thinking about, like, wow, I'm like, I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to just be stuck in the gym playing
Mhm.
basketball. Um, I really wanted to take that time to kind of figure out, like, what does my life look like? How am I gonna, once I graduate, what am I really gonna be focused on doing in order to support myself so that I could stay in New York and not have to go back home to Michigan. And um, I was able to do internships, and it freed up a lot of time for me to really explore the city and start thinking a little bit like longer term and bigger picture.
Yeah. Um, let's talk about your siblings. So you're the youngest, and it's a blended marriage, right? So there's
Mhm.
you have 3 older step siblings. Is that right?
Half siblings. So I
Half
have
siblings. I'm sorry.
a sister and 2 brothers that they're all 4, 6, and 8 years older than me.
And were you competitive with them? Did you still try to compete even though there was an age gap?
Um, Not so much. I mean, we had an age difference. My oldest brother actually was my first basketball coach. So, I ended up, playing with him, but he ended up becoming my first basketball coach in 5th grade because nobody else wanted to do it. Um, and he did that, and was really hard on me, um, which I probably deserved. but, we had like, the competitiveness didn't come from sports. They were all very, very supportive of, me and my high school and college journey.
Yeah. Were you competitive at home outside of sports? Would you try to
Yeah, no,
win?
for sure. I think, we were we weren't always all together. We weren't really all raised together, so it was, they were old enough that we didn't have any internal conflicts of, like, who was doing what. He was much more supportive than I think most siblings. We didn't really have any sibling rivalry. That actually came from the 3 of them. They had the
Uh-huh.
sibling rivalry, but because I was the youngest, I got away with a little bit more. They were a little easier on me than they were with each other.
How did those relationships change your leadership style or how you approach your business now?
Well, I think, when you're in a family and you have a blended family and, I had a different mother, um, and we were raised, uh, differently. I had my mom's parents who weren't their grandparents. We kinda had this, there was even though we were in the same household at times, we still also grew up in 2 very different households. And when we were all together, we kinda had to figure out, like, okay, our moms were extremely different. Um, how do we kind of all still get along? Like, how do we still function and be supportive and help each other out, even though maybe, like, we have had different life experiences or have been exposed to different things. Um, my dad was, he was great, and even my mom was very inclusive with them. It wasn't we weren't raised where, like, they were considered half siblings. When we were together, we were together, we were one family. Um, in a perfect world, we all would have grown up together, but that just really wasn't something that was, easy to navigate having different mothers. And they were in a different state, but we really tried to make the most of our time when we were together, and, um, it was great. We just never really I never had any conflicts with them, even though I'd like to strangle my sister at times.
Every good sibling relationship, right? A little bit of tension. That's great. Um, if you could go back and have a conversation with 12-year-old you, what would you say?
Um, I probably would say keep working hard. Don't focus on so much on the things that you can't control. Um, focus more on yourself and, staying the course. Um, things will ultimately they all work out. So I think it's very easy as a kid to worry about things, and then, as you get older, you realize a lot of those things that you thought were so important and going to be so life changing, they really don't end up mattering. Um, when you're young, you think you can be all things to all people, and then you get older and you realize, like, in the end, you need you don't need 100 great friends. You need, like, 3 really great friends, and you just need a group around you. You don't have to be best friends with everybody. Um, that you have to really enjoy what you're doing and not focus so much on the things that you can't always control.
And if your son could come and watch this years from now, what message do you want him to hear?
I want him to realize that he can do anything that he wants to in this life, as long as he works hard, as long as he stays focused, and he stays humble. I think he's gonna do amazing things. He's a super special kid. He just hopes that they use their giftedness and, the special features that all these kids have to the best of their ability, right? Nothing comes easy, no matter how great or how smart or how special you think you are. You still need to, like, really, really work hard and try and do your best, right? You don't have to do somebody else's best, but you have to do your best. Was one thing my mom always said, just do your best. You don't have to do what anyone else's best is. Your best is different than the best of the person sitting next to you. And she was right. So I
Yeah.
hope I can instill that in him as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Are there any specific books or tips and tricks that you would want your son to read or have?
Oh my gosh, I have so many books that I need to read. Sitting on my
What's your
nightstand.
favorite?
My problem is as soon as I start reading at night, I fall asleep. So it takes me forever now to make it through a book. But I've read The One Thing a couple times.
Mm.
And my husband got me into that because early on he noticed my undiagnosed ADHD, and how I probably try and multitask a little bit too much, um, and can't sit still and, try and just do too much in general. So I think that's a very, very good book, a very easy read. Um, there's so many great podcasts out there too. Um, if you can just make the time to do it. And then we have our CEO, Ryan Serhant, he's got 3 great books as well, that are
Mm.
all extremely easy reads, and for me, they they're it's part of our culture, so, I think they're something that even if you're a real estate professional, you can still put to use. Big Money Energy is great, just really thinking big and, the power of intention and putting, your thoughts into actions and kind of focusing on what you want and the life that you want to really build and create for yourself. I think that's really important.
Where can people find you online? Where if they want to interact with you, where can they find you?
Um, Instagram would be Andrea Daisy Edrei, AndreaDesyEdrei. That's my Instagram. And then our social media Instagram for our company is Society Select at Society Select. The website's societyselect.com. We also have Serhant.com. Um, but that's pretty much those are the main ones.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today and going on this journey. I've really enjoyed our conversation and am very grateful that you spent some time with us. So thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
The easiest way that you can support us on this journey is to subscribe, like, comment, share. If you know of anyone who might be interested in this subject, please pass it on. Talk to us. We want to hear your feedback. It will help us make this podcast better. We invite you to come along with us as we go on this journey, and thank you for your support.